Welcome back to the show. I'm John Knocklinger. I'm a men's divorce coach and a New Jersey divorce attorney and mediator. Today, we're going to talk to some divorce attorneys and find out what their advice is for all of you that are about to go through this really difficult process. Today, my guests are Sarah Jacobs and Jamie Berger. They're the owners of Jacobs Berger in Morristown, New Jersey, where they practice divorce and family law, and they also do adoption and mediation. They are two of the best divorce attorneys I know, and I know that you're going to all learn a lot from them today. Thank you so much for being here today, Sarah and Jamie.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us, John.
Of course. I've been wanting to talk to you guys on this a long time. I've actually wanted to see you guys for a long time, and now I finally found a way to see your faces. So I'm really excited.
Here we are.
Yes. It's so exciting to see your face this morning.
Oh, good. Well, that's always good for someone to be excited to see my face. That's always a good thing. So you guys handle all kinds of divorce matters, from, I'm sure, the simplest to the most complex. You've seen it all. You've done it all. And so, what we really want to talk about today is, how do we make the process better for people? And how do we make it better from the beginning through the end? So I always like to say, a good divorce process starts before you ever set foot into an attorney's office. So we'll start with you, Sarah. If you were to give advice to somebody who just decided, I want to get divorced, or they were just told, that their spouse wants to have a divorce, what would be the best advice you would give them as the first step they should take?
Oh boy, John, you like to hit hard at the start of this, right? And I like how you started with me and didn't give Jamie the hardball question. So one of the things that I think is the most important is, first and foremost, don't panic, because it is an overwhelming situation. It does feel very emotional. You tend to want to do all of the things and none of the things all at the same exact time. And I think that it probably stands to serve you best if you take a breath and try to get organized. And I think that one of the things that is really critical for someone who's about to embark on this process, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, as it may be in your scenario, is to find a place to get their homework done. Start gathering your paperwork that you do have in your possession. Try to make lists of the questions that you have. Seek resources from your friends, like who did they use, who do you think is important, but really start to establish your independent list of must-haves. Do you want someone who, talks to you all the time? Do you want someone who emails you? Do you want someone who explains things to you? Do you need someone who has a team available to them? Do you want somebody who is a one-on-one type of individual? Because without really understanding what you need and what you want out of the process, and just by taking a survey of like the top 10, people in your neighborhood who got divorced and who they used and what their outcomes were, you're swayed by what the masses are and not by what your internal compass is telling you is important for you in the process. And I think a lot of people who enter this process sort of because this one or that one told them that they needed this person or that person or this thing or the other thing, they almost have buyer's remorse in the beginning because they didn't really understand what they needed. And if they somewhat, for lack of a better term, get straight with themselves before the process starts, they're better off vetting who they're meeting with, what they need out of this process, what their priorities and their goals are. And that makes them more empowered when they're starting to make even the first choice, which is finding the partner that they're going to have in this process, which is their divorce team.
Right. And Jamie, would you ever recommend that somebody not immediately go get an attorney and maybe do something else whenever the divorce process starts?
I think that, obviously it depends on the person. I think there is a logical point in which, an attorney's intervention becomes necessary to the process. But I think, piggybacking on what Sarah said, having the conversation with an attorney as a prepared client or as prepared as you can be, I think eliminates a lot of that fear in that initial conversation, because you've done some of that behind the scenes work, whether it's talking to a divorce coach, whether it's talking to a therapist, whether it's talking to friends, family, colleagues, whoever it is. If you've kind of unburdened that initial emotional reaction somewhere else, you can go into that conversation with an attorney and hear some of the things that maybe you would be unable to hear if you didn't have some of those preliminary conversations.
And on that note, Jamie, Sarah was talking about, getting advice from other people, family, friends that have been through the process. At what point do you need to stop listening to specific advice? Obviously, I had Sarah, I had Jamie. They were an incredible attorney. They listened to me. Their team was responsive to me. They got back to me. But then they start to tell you, oh, and Jamie got me this amount of alimony, and I got custody of my kids, and I got this. Where's the line where you stop listening to all of that noise?
I think that's a really good question and I think it's different for everybody, but I do think, I always say to people, the people in your life are well-intentioned and they want to help you. Like that's, always start from that premise. But when you start comparing, or we start hearing in an initial meeting with a potential client, oh, well, Sally got X, or that, it's the point in which we have to say, like, every situation is different. No two situations are exactly the same. And so I think when you start to hear, when you're starting to focus more on the outcome of somebody else's divorce and not the person that they're referring, and how, to your point, responsive is their team, responsive is the attorney, how practical is the attorney? What is their focus? Are they a quote unquote bulldog, or are they, focused on trying to collaborate and come to a resolution? Like, those are the things that I think for clients, it's important to focus on, and people, it's important to focus on. But when you start to hear you can get this if you work with this person, or you may get, this if you work with that person, that's the point where you might want to turn down the dial on some of that noise.
Yeah. And Sarah, you were talking about being very clear-headed whenever the divorce process starts. And I've noticed over my career that women have an easier time doing that than men a lot of times. In fact, a lot of women have they have a process they go through before they decide they want to get divorced. So let's come at this from a different perspective. Let's come at it from the perspective of a husband who claims they didn't know this was about to happen, although we know that's just someone putting their head in the sand. They didn't know it was gonna happen. Their wife says, I want a divorce. And basically the wife said, and I already have an attorney, I'm ready to get the process started. How do you suggest that person truncate this process that you just took us through, that I think is really a great process? But how do you truncate it when that person is now going through all of it, all the emotions, everything in a very condensed time frame?
Again, heavy-hitting question coming my way. So it's hard being the quote second person playing catch up in this process. Like, I think that there has to be some kind of a request for a little bit of space. Obviously, if their spouse is saying to them, I want a divorce, I already have an attorney, let's get moving. I think there's nothing wrong with saying, like, I need a hot minute to catch up to where you are. I think there's a difference between saying that and then dragging out the process because they're putting their head back in the sand, or they're unwilling to face the reality of what's going on. But taking a deep breath and like marshaling their resources, right? Okay, what are the things I need to do in this moment while I'm grieving and having this emotional response? There is a necessity for action, but I think that can be one of those situations where they ask, give me a week to figure out what I want to do before you're pushing forward in this situation. But I also think they have to act during that week. They have to make a few phone calls. They have to do their independent research. They have to start gathering their paperwork like the other side has done. But I also think, and you asked the question very specifically, John, I see this on a regular basis, and I hate to generalize, but I think we've all sort of doing this for all the time that the three of us have been doing this for, like, we see a little bit more trend established. I think they have to start to open up. They have to start to really talk about what they're feeling and how they're feeling it. And they need to start the processing of processing, because men tend to tunnel inward and not utilize their feelings and their voice to say how they're feeling and the boundaries that they need. And they start to like almost ignore everything that's happening and try to drag the process out as long as possible, because then they don't have to do the tasks that they need to do in order to get the process going. So I think they have to really turn outward and ask for help. And whether that's help from family members or help from professionals or help from both, it really doesn't matter as long as they start to do it, because the sooner they get into the process, the easier it actually becomes to establish what the guidelines and the boundaries are and to move it forward. And I think what you were saying before about the idea of like, are there things that they can do before they get like a divorce team? Jamie and I will both tell you, and you know this because you've done it a million times, and this is why you're sitting in the shoes. A good lawyer is going to tell you when you don't need their team and when they should go to mediation or when they should take a breath or when they should have a conversation with their spouse, because that's like the way to read the room in the moment. Yeah, there are certain reasons why you need a divorce team right away. Sometimes litigation just surprises you, but like a good attorney is going to read the person that's in front of them and help them take that breath and get them organized and to where they feel like they can get a handle on the situation and actually be productive in moving a case forward.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Sarah. And I think a good attorney also is going to be very clear on what their, how do I say this, scope of work really is. And that they're going to be very clear with the client, you know, here's what my job is for you. My job is not there to be your friend. It's not there to be your therapist. It's not there, you know, for you to just recap everything bad that's happened in your life. My goal and my job is very specific. So I guess, Jamie, how do you personally set sort of those boundaries with your clients? Because we all know if you let a client tell you the breakup story, the story of, you know, what happened 5 years ago, you let them tell you those stories repeatedly, their bill's going to get out of control.
Yeah.
And that's not going to do anything to help advance their case forward. So what do you do? Are there any resources that you suggest that clients get involved at the very beginning to help them help themselves to get through the process?
Absolutely. And I mean, Sarah knows the line that I say repeatedly to almost every client that I meet with, because I think there is a blurring of lines, and I think some attorneys are better at making sure that line is crisp and some are not. I'm very direct, as you know, you've known me for a long time. You know, so is Sarah, obviously, but I will say to clients flat out, if you are paying me to be your therapist, you are overpaying me based on my hourly rate for a service I am absolutely not qualified to do. So that's like, I put it out there because that also, and then the second part of it, the softer part of that sentence is, but I have really wonderful resources in that area. And I would be happy to make referrals to you, because I do think it's really important during this process, which can be overwhelming, whether you're the person initiating it or the recipient of it and didn't know it was coming or didn't want to know it was coming. It's overwhelming. And so having that resource, you know, having some, you know, mental health support, having a therapist, I am always happy in a case to make those referrals, because I think they're necessary. And I think it serves as a very good reminder, both to the attorney and to the client, that that's a line we shouldn't blur. Because if we do, I'm not doing my job properly, and you're not utilizing me for what it is you need me to do for you. So it's really just understanding the client and making sure that they have those resources in place, and that team, my team, to help, you know, their divorce team within our office, but also, you know, outside, who do you need to connect with that will make this process easier for you? And so my philosophy is do it directly and do it often, and set those reminders, you know, for clients, so that that they don't try to blur the line, because I understand, you know, in doing this for so many years, it's very easy to do.
Yeah, it's all about expectations from the very beginning, making sure they understand. And I think something you said earlier, Sarah, about when you're looking at attorneys, like what kind of team do they have, is so important, because if an attorney has a really good paralegal, for example, the paralegal probably will know as much about your case as the attorney does at a much lower hourly rate. And there's certain things that you can sort of get the paralegal involved with that maybe you don't need to get the attorney involved with. And I think a good legal team is gonna be able to explain to you how their team works, number one, what the legal process is for and what it's not for, because I see this constantly everywhere. where people hire an attorney and they think that attorney is going to do everything. It's like they go in and they just avail themselves and they're like, okay, I'm getting divorced, make everything better. But what is our job? Our job is, I mean, as courts, to get you divorced and get you as good of a result as possible and move you on with your life. But once you're done, you've got to move on with your life. You've got to figure out what your next step is, what's going to happen. And we're not there to sit and be involved with your life the way that we were during a divorce. And I think people sort of, when the divorce is over, sometimes they feel like, oh my gosh, what now? My attorney's gone. Like, how are they going to help me resolve things? So Sarah, I've got an interesting question for you. I don't think this one's quite as hard as the last couple ones.
I don't believe you, John.
Have you ever told clients, listen, aside from you getting your own therapy, which I really think most people going through divorce should have a therapist or some independent person who's not their attorney to speak to, have you ever recommended that parents go into co-parenting therapy like early on in the process? Have you ever had someone come into your office who's unsure about whether or not they want to be divorced? Have you ever recommended that maybe they go to some kind of counseling with their spouse to get some clarity on that before they get started? Just give me an idea of what you do for those people that come into your office and they really need some counseling with them and their spouse to make sure the process goes a little bit smoother.
Yeah, so this is an interesting question because Jamie and I sort of bang this drum loudly, like on a regular basis. And we sort of feel like we sit on an island sometime having this conversation because, to your point, our jobs are to be an attorney. Our job is to divorce somebody, and our job is, or whatever aspect of family law we're handling, and to do the best job possible. But Jamie and I also sort of want to take that what happens after, and you don't have somebody propping you up to help sort of guide the conversation and make the decisions. So we want to escalate that to the beginning. So we're really big proponents, and we're really big proponents of our team also having this conversation, to the extent that it's appropriate with a client, about like, how do we start giving you agency in some of these decisions? How do we start empowering you to like make independent choices, even if they're bite size at the early stage, so that you can keep making these choices and feel good about the choices that you've made all along, despite the fact that the situation may suck, for lack of a better term. But when you're at the end of it, you can stand on your own 2 feet and feel that you have options to move yourself forward in that without needing to sort of like, okay, what do I do now, to your point? So we have these conversations really early. We've 100% recommended discernment counseling for those clients where we're like, are you sure that this isn't a marital issue and that you guys don't want to try reconciling or trial separation? And yeah, we talk about the legal aspect of what that can be and like how you may not want to shoot yourself in the foot if you're making certain choices, if it's going to have a legal implication. But we've recommended co-parenting counseling from day one. We've recommended family counseling. We've recommended independent counseling. We've recommended, discernment counseling. We've recommended financial planning. Sometimes when you guys are fighting over money, and maybe it's just about learning how to budget and learning how to spend appropriately and having difficult money conversations that maybe you didn't have when you got married, or something's changed, or, somebody got sick and there's like some kind of hurdle that you have to work through. Not everything is a divorce situation. And a lot of people, they throw the D word around, they rush to the concept, and it's not really what they want or what they need. And sometimes people just aren't ready. Sometimes they come to you and they're noodling the idea around, and maybe they want to understand what the process means a little bit more, and sending them back to where they started from and asking them to think about it really deeply and trying to make that list of like, what are your goals? What's important to you? And like discern whether this is a marital issue or like a you issue or like a life issue. Take the time, figure it out, start from square one, and have the resource conversations that you need to really understand what you put yourself in. I think we've come across at least Jay, like maybe like 10 to 15 cases and our careers together, at least in the business that we have together, where people like have surprised us and they're like, we're reconciling. And we're like, yeah, we didn't really know why you were here in the first place, but you were really sure that you wanted to do that. And we're all in favor of it. We're like, great. Right. And we're really happy when we're doing prenups, and we're trying to have those conversations with the clients that are having prenups. Like, have you talked about how you're spending your money? Have you spoken about the things you want to do? Like, don't just blindly sign a document if you haven't really talked about this in advance, because we don't want to see you, prenup or not. in 5 years because you didn't really think this through. So we're always having those conversations from minute one.
And if I could, I just want to add something also. Like I always say, you get good at kind of reading the person that you're talking to and understanding, what's motivating them. And, is this a moment in life? Is this really, and we're not in the business of breaking up happy marriages, right? Like if somebody comes to you and needs your services and needs a divorce, then absolutely we can do that. But also like having that conversation and having that human conversation. I'm not a tiger at your back, pushing you to do this unless there's a really compelling reason why I think you need to, right? Like I'm here if you need me, but here's all these other resources for you to figure out whether or not you need us and our team or, somebody to help you in that way. But it's like, I never want to feel like I'm the tiger at somebody's back because then, I have those conversations and then I've had clients say to us or say to me, thank you for saying that because I feel like I talked to so-and-so and I felt like the only way for me to proceed is to go through a divorce right now, like in this moment. I'm like, well, that's probably a crappy way to walk out of somebody's office feeling.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting too is the way that men and women look at divorce differently. Like I'll have men come in who will be very concerned with what is it going to mean, the bottom lines, like what is it going to mean money-wise, all this sort of stuff. Women are much more, in my opinion, much more in tune with, am I going to be okay? Just generally speaking, am I going to be okay? Or my kids can be okay? If I go through this process, are they going to get hurt? And so what I think is interesting is all the reasons people give for not going through a divorce process, even though they've decided that's what's best for them. Like, oh, I'm going to have to pay this amount of alimony. Well, I'll just stay married. Or, oh my gosh, I don't want to have a fight over custody. Let's just wait till they go to college, for another 8 years, and then I'll go through a divorce. And you lose sight of the fact that what's best for the family is for you to go through this process now and, stop the pain that your family's going through. And I think what you were saying, Sarah, about discernment counseling, and I've done a podcast with someone who does that kind of counseling. It is so important, but it's something that a lot of men don't think is something they really want to do. I mean, you guys know it's hard to get a guy just to go to therapy, just regular therapy. And so it's really something that I really hope that the guys listening, you heard what they have been telling you today, because it applies, I think, even more to you. You've got to get a handle on your emotions and don't come from a place of anger. And you really need to work through everything. And as they've been telling you, it might not be that you need divorce. Maybe you just need to work on your marriage. But if you need a divorce, you need to make sure you come into the divorce from a place of not anger. I don't know how you guys feel, but I feel like 95% of divorce is emotion. There's very little, and I think anymore, there's very little sort of law that's truly in dispute anymore. I mean, we can make arguments on the margins, maybe $10 more here, $20 less over there, but really, what do you guys think about how much of the fights you have, the litigation, the actual going to court, spending a lot of money, fighting, how much of that in your experience is really law related and how much of it is just emotion related? Somebody wants to win.
I think for, in my practice, and I, obviously, as you know, John, we do a lot of mediation, we litigate cases, but in, cases that are litigated, I would say 98% of it is emotion driven. It's because at the, and no matter how many times you say to somebody in the process, this is the box. This is the box in which a court is going to decide your case. And you're not going to be the anomaly where a judge is going, yes, to your point, there's margins, right? There's some nuance, but you're not going to be the anomaly outside the box. And so if that is the thought process, then you're being driven by something else. You're being driven by the need to win. You're being driven by principle. You're being driven by emotion. And if those are your drivers, then you need to take a step back and look at, is that worth the pursuit that you're on, or is there a better way to do this? And I would say 98% of the time, there is a better way to do it.
I think as you practice this type of law, you see a spectrum, right? From the start of a case to the end of the case. And no matter where the litigants are coming in their process, maybe they've separated physically, maybe they, have had this conversation for 2 years. And so they're coming into the physical process, further along in their emotional journey. A case is litigated, or a case is disputed, or a case is hot, for lack of a better term, in the beginning of that process, of that spectrum. And the case settles and moves very quickly once both parties get to an acceptance phase, get over the fear phase, maybe not the fear of the unknown, but the fear of, as you said, John, am I going to be okay? Or will I have enough money? And when they're tired of that emotional expenditure of energy, and they want to feel differently about it. They want to feel happy and comfortable and calm and not locked in this sort of, head-on concept anymore. That's when a case settles. And it usually settles really quickly after that on terms that you've been discussing maybe for the last 6 to 8 to 9 to 12 months before that. But they have to get to that emotional phase. And if they enter the process farther into their emotional curve, the case is much shorter because they've already gone through all of that sort of learning curve on their emotions. If it's very raw for them on the minute that they're entering the process, it's going to take longer. And we're going to have those conversations with them more regularly about where their emotion fits into this process and what resources they need to manage that. And I think, you can gauge, as Jamie said, you read the person that's in front of you and you gauge where they are in the process, and you try to start angling the advice that you're giving them about the choices that they should make to where they are in the process. Sometimes you just need to calm them down so they can hear what you're saying, and they need to see a little bit of action and things getting done. And then they're like, okay, I can handle this. I can make choices now because the noise, to Jamie's point, has been turned down.
Right. Turn down that dial.
And we've been talking to 2 really great divorce attorneys, and, we're talking about how you guys help your clients manage everything. But let's go away from the clients for a minute and talk about the not so good divorce attorneys out there, because we all know if you get a not so good divorce attorney on the other side, it really doesn't matter what kind of client management you're doing, because another attorney can really cause a lot of problems. So Jamie, so you've started a divorce process. Your client's spouse has hired one of those attorneys. What do you do? Does your process change? If so, how do you advise your client that their process might be different now?
For me, again, it's all about, to your point earlier, John, setting expectations and being upfront about it. If I see the name on the other side of the case is a person that I know is going to wreak havoc, I have an obligation, and I will tell my client, this is what we are going to have to deal with. So, and I say we call them strategic planning sessions. I say in every strategic planning session, I only have control to the extent that you and I have a partnership, and we can communicate effectively, and you can hear and listen to the advice that I'm giving you, but I don't have any control on the other side. And so, those are the things. So it's just about, that's something that is going to drive up your litigation costs. That is something that is going to serve as an impediment to resolving your case, because I know that, I know what is on the other side of a case. In terms of changing my process, it might be a scenario where I'm recommending to the client, go to mediation without counsel if we can get the other attorney to agree. Go to mediation and see if you can make some headway with your spouse and come back. Just taking, not engaging in litigation by letter, because that's, the only way that the other attorney will practice. And, but sometimes, sometimes you are, unfortunately, it comes to a point where you have to wait for the other side, the other client, to become so fed up and frustrated by their own attorney that they're willing to have that buyer's remorse and see that they need to change guard so that the case can move forward productively. And sometimes that's just the case, but it's, again, having those conversations openly and honestly with your client so that they know what to expect.
Sarah, have you ever had your client maybe go try to talk to their spouse and say anything about the attorney that they've selected? Has that ever been something that you've tried to sort of get behind the scenes to get ahead of this? Because we all know a really, let's say, not a great attorney on the other side, because I don't want to use the word bad, but not a great attorney on the other side can really be the difference between your legal bill being, $10,000 and $80,000. And it can just be an attorney that's causing the problem.
The answer to your question is occasionally. And the only reason I say that is because, and I think that and again, I'm making a supposition and a generalization. There are, of course, as Jamie said, anomalies outside the box, but 99% of the time, if you've got one of those attorneys on the other side, the spouse and the attorney are one and the same, and they have selected that attorney not by accident and not by, oops, I didn't know. Yes, of course, there's that moment where Jamie says that person is like, my bill is astronomical. You're not following my directions. I don't understand. And in that scenario, absolutely. If the spouses can have a conversation, go at it. Find a way to talk about like maintaining the family money. Both lawyers are taking our fees. How do we stop this? Can't we sit down and have a conversation? Can our attorneys have a conversation? Can we get in the same room? There are techniques, but some letterheads you get and you just know that spouse is out for blood, and you need to tell your client, like, listen, this is who they selected. This is why they selected this. This is what's on the table. How do you want to respond? Because you should be responding, not reacting. And a lot of times those letters, like Jamie says, they'll incite the emotions. There's a whole slew of conversations, but our job is to then steer, like, what are the issues on the table? How do we make progress despite the pot being stirred? And sometimes you can't. Sometimes it just has to go its course. You have to default to the court, which we all know is like the worst situation right now. And you have to try to outweigh the situation. But you can continue to prepare your client and do things in your own house that can move the ball forward no matter what. They can be talking to tax advisors. They can be talking to therapists. They can be planning their future while they wait in that situation. But it's hard. It's hard to get them to see that that's an okay situation if you can't move the needle on the other side. We don't have control over those people.
I was so hoping this was the answer you were going to give, Sarah. And I knew you would, because you're so brilliant. Because I think that you hit the nail on the head. The selection of the attorney answers the question about the process your spouse wants. It really does. Don't let your spouse gaslight you. Oh, I didn't know my attorney was doing that. Oh, my attorney, I'll go talk to my attorney. I don't know why they're doing all this stuff. No, don't play those games. Like, somebody that selects one of these really, really aggressive attorneys, that's what they went to look for. And I think I always say that's the assumption you should have unless it's disproven. Exactly. You should always assume that that's what they're wanting. So don't let somebody kind of try to sweet talk you in the house saying, oh, no, I want this process to be nice and easy, and then go hire somebody that is known for not having that kind of process.
You know what I remind clients of, John? I remind them, no letter is going to go out of my office without your eyes on it, unless it's like a form letter filing something, that you've already approved. So you have to always assume that your spouse has authorized that attorney to send whatever they're sending. So to your point, don't let them, not a nice grin, not a nice word, you at home, because that's already been done. They've already authorized their attorney to make that move. And so Sarah's 100% right. It's going to tell you a lot. And I say that to clients all the time. I'm like, I'm going to have a very good sense once I see who's on the other side of that letterhead. And that's going to give us an indication of where we're going.
And I think 9 out of 10 times, if they are the anomaly and they did choose poorly and they are not being requested, is this the strategy you want to take? Are you okay with me sending the letter with this particular language? That attorney is out real fast. If that client doesn't want the process to go that way and did choose wrong, they've got a new attorney in the mix pretty quickly, because that's not what they wanted in the first place. If that attorney is in and stays in, this is who that client wanted.
And they burned through that retainer. We all know they burned through that retainer very quickly because they're over litigating a case, straight out of the gate that, doesn't necessarily need to be over litigated. And so I think it's also staying calm and centered and consistent with your client, that this is the process will progress, albeit slower. The process will progress, and we're going to take measured steps. We're not going to be reactionary.
Yeah. And Jamie, don't worry, you can use whatever words you want to on this podcast. Not for children, so don't worry about that. So, okay, well, let's get away from like the difficult cases and get back to how people really hopefully should get divorced, which is through mediation and other alternative dispute resolution. I know you both have a lot of experience with mediation. Jamie and I trained together for mediation. I don't even know how many years ago that was, but many, many years ago. And I know you both really feel strongly that it is a great way to help people resolve their differences. So I want to talk a little bit about mediation. So there's really two periods that people go through mediation. One is very early in the case, either with or without attorneys, like really early. And the other one is once they've been litigating for some time and they're sort of forced into mediation by the court system. So, and I know each one's a little bit different. So I guess let's start with you, Sarah, about like sort of the early mediation. Who's a good candidate for that? And do you ever recommend that people go through that process without attorneys versus having their attorneys there?
I think unless there is a real complicated factor that inhibits the mediative process, an extreme mental illness, really detrimental domestic violence, an addiction, I think everybody is a candidate for mediation, even high conflict cases, because a good mediator will be able to find common ground no matter what. It just may take a long time. So I'm a huge proponent of staying out of the court system and going to mediation as many times as necessary. I tell the story, and it's COVID based, so I think that was the genesis of it. But a colleague of mine and we had a really high conflict case, high volume, high money, high conflict. We chose a mediator probably 6 months into the case after we had done some discovery. I think we went to mediation something like 17 times over the course of a 3-year process. We did it with attorneys. We did it without attorneys. We did it attorney-only mediation where the attorneys came with just the mediator to work through some of the legal issues and options that we could have brought back to our clients. And the case settled. And it never saw the light of day in a courtroom. And it lasted from pre-COVID through, let's say, 2022. So they had an option to stop this mediation and find their way back into a courtroom. And they did it. No matter how difficult the case was, they committed to the process. The mediator was in, the attorneys were in, the clients were in, and they hated each other. They still hate each other. They're having post-judgment litigation right now because they can't stop fighting. But they're still going to the mediator to resolve the issues because they had that much confidence in the way that the mediation process was handled to get them to a resolution despite their poll stars. So I think mediation works for everybody if you want to commit to the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you just have to be committed to the process. And I think at the end, you just have to have a commitment. Even people that maybe have less money, a commitment not to spend all your money fighting. Like it can be as simple as that. And you cannot agree on anything else. And a good mediator will still be able to find a way to resolve everything. Because, mediation, you don't have to be in the same room. You can be in 2 different rooms. And now it's even better. You can do mediation over Zoom. So you don't even have to look at your spouse. Like you can really do it in a way where, your emotions are down. But Jamie, in terms of this early intervention mediation, do you always need to start a legal process? Do you need to file a complaint? with the court and get a divorce started before you start mediation? And if not, is there anything that you might have your clients do or not do if you're going to be trying to resolve things for an extended period of time without getting the court involved?
Yeah, so you absolutely can go to mediation privately without involving the court at all. And in fact, the majority of mediation clients that come to both Sarah and I are coming before there's been a complaint, unless they're, again, in the court process and it's an economic mediation or the attorneys involved have picked one of us as the mediator. But I do think, in terms of starting the process, it's important for if I'm the attorney for a client who's going through mediation, then we're going to make strategic choices, whether they want to have their attorney sitting next to them, whether they are comfortable going to mediation on their own, who we're going to select as the mediator. So those are all those like preliminary conversations that really need to happen between me as the attorney and my client, who's not a mediation client. They're a divorce client, a litigation client, but we're going to try to mediate and resolve it amicably. So those are absolutely, and I think selection of the mediator is really important, and making sure that they are going into mediation prepared, meaning that there's a level of financial disclosure. We've done some preliminary, either, back of the napkin discovery, not, formal discovery through a court process, because if we haven't initiated anything through the court, but exchanged some financial information, had some, of the tough conversations with respect to custody and parenting time and finances, so that when they go into mediation, if I'm not with them, or if an attorney from our office is not with them, then they have had those conversations initially, and they've, we've given, exchanged that information, so they're going in informed. So I think that's the most important piece, again, with selecting the right mediator. And I think that that's typically a conversation that has to happen with the client first. Why do I think this mediator would be a good fit for you? Why do I think that, maybe the other side has proposed somebody that I don't think would be a good fit for your particular case, and have those initial discussions. And then, and then do they want you sitting there? Are they okay going without you? I'm led by my client in that regard. Sometimes they, at least for the initial session, they want the security of having their attorney there. And maybe then they're, they feel more empowered. They're comfortable going on their own. So again, it's really client driven at that stage. And you're also just getting to know your client because it's early on. And so you have to have strategic conversations about what is best for that particular client.
Well, Sarah, what if there's no attorney involved? Like two people, they're getting divorced, and they're like, listen, I heard about this thing called mediation. Let's go find ourselves a mediator and just get this done. In that situation, I'm sure you've probably mediated when people have just walked in your office. I know I do it all the time. Jamie was talking about, you're representing a client, so you have certain things that you need to do as an attorney to make sure that you know everything, so you can advise your client, even if it is informal exchange of information. But well, these two people that come in and they're like, they have W-2 jobs, they kind of already know what they want to do with their kids. They just need somebody just to kind of make sure they don't forget anything, that they address everything. What kind of advice do you give those people? I guess on two fronts. One, what kind of homework do they need to actually do before they start mediation? And two, how do they find the right mediator when they don't have a brilliant attorney advising them on who they might use as a mediator?
So I especially when I'm in the shoes of as the mediator in that situation, they get a whole list of homework before I'll even have them in for their first session. I send them, the requisite case information statements. I ask them to, provide documentation on the assets and the liabilities, so I have an opportunity to review them. I may ask follow-up questions for additional documents before they hit the door. I send them like this document that's called holiday and vacation concepts, where I'm not just saying pick and divide the holidays, but I have a list of questions that they should think about in terms of like logistics and planning, so that they can even independently think about this, but maybe if they're communicating with their spouse, start to have some preliminary discussions so that there's some sort of baseline understanding when they hit my office and we start to dig in. Because I find that a lot of couples who choose mediation, and especially choose mediation for the cost saving perspective, not just for the amicable, expeditious process, but really for the cost savings, they're not informed. They haven't done their homework. They think the mediator is going to solve all their problems, and they haven't really had these conversations. And some of them don't really understand what they're talking about or what they're agreeing to. I will ask them to at least talk to an attorney, even if they don't want to hire one, even if they don't want to bring one with them. I encourage them to at least get some homework and some research so that they're educated about the language that we're talking about. Because my job as a mediator, as a neutral facilitator, I'm allowed to educate to certain points, but I can't give legal advice to any of them. So I can't really say to them, this is what a good alimony award would look like. I can, delicately express to them what I think would be a court's decision at the end of the day. But what I think it would be a court's decision isn't what necessarily what Jamie would think would be a court's decision. And I'm not positional in that situation. So I'm really encouraging them to A, communicate, B, do their own individual homework, C, gather everything that they might need to review and understand. Do you know how many clients walk in my door? They're like, well, I have a comp program. And I'm like, okay, well, are your RSUs or NSOs transferable? And they're like, look at me with a deer in headlights, and they don't even know that that's part of their comp plan. I'm like, okay, let's start from scratch. What's here? So, the more they can get this information in advance, the better they are when they come to the table. Because as Jamie said, an educated consumer is a better person to be making choices in that moment. And then they're actually saving money, because if the mediator has to educate them for 5 or 6 sessions about all the things that they didn't know before they walked in the door, they may not be saving money.
Yeah. And so, Jamie, how do you find, a great mediator like Sarah over here, who is going to, give you the right homework so that you have the right resources and the right information available to make good decisions?
I think some of it is word of mouth. I think once you get a good reputation as a mediator, people tend to recommend you a lot. So that is one way. The other way, I encourage people, go to the firm's website, see, look at the bio, see if the messaging that is on the firm's website translates to what makes for a good mediator, right? So if the messaging of the website is the art of war, well, you might not want to choose that firm as a mediator, right? So like in our firm, the message is, how do we de-stress the divorce process as best we can? And so that it's just make sure that the words fit before you engage with somebody, because I do think that that's impactful. And understanding the dynamic and how you connect. When we meet mediation clients, we do an informal meet and greet. It's not a full consultation. It's obviously with both parties present, and we just talk. I give them kind of the ins and outs of mediation. I'm assessing them the same way that they're assessing me. I'm assessing whether I think they will be good mediation candidates based on how they interact with one another too, whether it's in my office or on Zoom. So it's listening for things in those discussions to see, is this somebody that I can trust, and I believe has properly informed me about the process, and that I can connect with to facilitate a resolution. I mean, there's some of it is blind faith, but educated blind faith is better than just blind faith.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things that people forget when they're going to a mediator who's an attorney, and Sarah, you've already touched on this, but I think it bears repeating, is they're not there to be anyone's attorney. And I think that's difficult for a lot of these mediation clients to understand, that we're not there to give the advice about what you should agree to. I mean, certainly we can, provide some level of opinion about maybe what a court would do. I think that's a great way of saying it, Sarah. But as all of us know, not all mediators approach mediation the same way too. Some won't give any opinion whatsoever about anything. They think their job is, I call them the kumbaya mediators. It's like, we're going to hold hands until we reach an agreement. Whereas I think the three of us are a little bit more on the standpoint of, sometimes people are asking you just give us some direction, point in a direction, and at least give us some direction. And we don't have a problem doing that because they've come, especially people come to us and they're like, listen, like, for example, we know there's going to be alimony. Okay. We both agree there's going to be alimony. We have no idea how much it should be. We have no clue. Like, just give us some direction. So I think part of what we've been discussing is whenever you're looking for a mediator, find out what kind of approach they take. Because if you're looking for the mediator to give you some direction and both of you want that direction, there's some mediators that might not do that. So those are important questions for you to ask about their process. And those might not be evident from the website, Jamie, but I think the website's great in terms of the messaging. I cannot emphasize that enough. Like, do they have videos on their website about mediation? Like, do they have something where they actually think it's an important enough thing that they want to convey to the public about mediation? If there's nothing about mediation on their website, probably I would just approach with caution that person. So I guess for both of you though, so you go to mediation, and this is something people get very confused about, but you go to mediation and maybe you've now reached an agreement. At that point, what happens next? What happens after you reach an agreement mediation? You can talk from your own personal perspective about what you do, but I think it's something that clients misunderstand about what is going to happen after mediation's over and they reach an agreement.
I'll grab this one. And I think that part of, back to what you were just asking about, picking the mediator, it's important to ask the question in terms of, that initial conversation. If we reach an agreement, are you willing as a mediator to draft what's called a neutral marital settlement agreement? Some mediators will, some won't. And so, if that is something that the couple desires, you want to make sure that the mediator that you've chosen is willing to do that for you. And if they're not, then that maybe is not the right fit. It's really important also for clients to understand that as the mediator, I'm always going to, as I know Sarah does, I'm always going to recommend if both parties ask for us to draft or for me to draft a neutral MSA, I will do it. I'm always going to encourage the clients to have independent counsel review it from an advocacy perspective, because that is not my role as the mediator. My role is to take the terms that we came to and codify them either in a neutral agreement, if that's what's requested, or in a term sheet, a memorandum of understanding. There's all these phrases that people don't know until they're involved in the process, but that it's important for clients to know that mediator cannot then file something on your behalf, because a mediator cannot then turn into an advocate for either one of you, and no attorney can represent two people. So those are the things that, setting expectations and understanding and educating clients early on in the process, and that initial meet and greet, I think goes a long way, because then they're not left, okay, now we have these terms, what do we do? They have that roadmap as part of the initial discussion, so they kind of know the next phase of things if we are able to come to a resolution in mediation.
It's interesting. I never knew that it was called a neutral matrimonial settlement agreement, because I draft them all the time. Yeah. But apparently, there we go. Now I can call it that. Well, but Sarah, I think Jamie just threw out a bunch of what our legal vernacular, and I'm kind of interested if you could just educate our listeners, because I think no matter where you're listening to this, these concepts are the same everywhere. A memorandum of understanding, a term sheet, and a settlement agreement that is being signed. Can you just sort of walk us through what those three different things are?
Sure. And I sort of look at them like they're blocks that stack on top of each other, right? So like the way that I view a term sheet is a enumerated or bullet point list of basic agreements that the parties have come to. So let's use alimony as an example. Alimony will be paid from X to Y. It will be paid at, a term of 9 years. It will be $3,000 a month, and it will be paid, bi-weekly with the payor's pay stub, right? That's a term, and a sheet would have all of those terms in that bullet point, manner. to me, a memorandum of understanding is going to be a layer up from there. Maybe the memorandum of understanding, John and Sally have agreed that John will pay Sally $3,000 a month bi-weekly via check, electronic deposit, Venmo, Cash App, etc. For a term of 9 years. And if he's late, this is what's going to happen, right? There's a little bit of color, a little bit of sort of the who, what, when, where, why, and how in the memorandum of understanding, but it's still going to be somewhat of a truncated document, but not quite a bullet pointed list with just the basics of it. It's going to have a little bit more detail. And then when you talk about a settlement agreement, you're talking about a full-fledged agreement, start to finish, with all of the concepts that are discussed or should be part of a regular settlement agreement. If there's children, there's custody and parenting time. You're talking about, legal custody and physical custody. You're talking about terms that the parties have agreed to with regard to relocation or, right of first refusal. You are talking about how the parties are going to dispose of their assets, deadlines for when the parties are going to do certain actions, and what happens if those deadlines are not met. But I think, to Jamie's point, as a mediator, if you are drafting a settlement agreement, you should be drafting a settlement agreement based upon the discussions that you had in mediation. As the mediator, you shouldn't be putting terms in the who, what, when, where, why, and how into the settlement agreement that weren't discussed with the clients and not agreed to by the clients. So that's the critical point, where if you have a term sheet or if you have a memorandum of understanding, or even if you have a neutral MSA, the clients need to take that to a lawyer and have them take a look at it. Is there something missing that should be put in here? Now, if you have a really good mediator, all those terms should be in there, because you should have talked about them during mediation and you should have come to some level of agreement. And if you didn't come to an agreement, the agreement should actually say the parties discussed this and could not resolve this, and this is how they're choosing to handle it moving forward, so that there's a recitation of the conversation that took place. But absent that, they need to go to a lawyer and talk about whether there's something missing. I've had people come to me as what is known as a review attorney after they've been to mediation. I'm like, hold up, you don't have a bankruptcy clause in this agreement. You're receiving support. You want that to be a domestic support obligation so it's not dischargeable. And they're like, this is the first time we've ever heard of that. Okay, cool. Let's talk about it some more. So, I think that there's a good bunch of people that should go to mediation, but this is what harkens back to like our conversation about choosing the right mediator. They should be somebody who does this all the time. They shouldn't just be a processing center for what the two of you want to talk about and put on paper, because that person is wasting your money.
Yeah, and we all know that there's places out there that are processing centers that you need to avoid. And what happens? We have to clean up the mess later on.
Every time, John.
It happens constantly. Well, thanks for that explanation, Sarah. I think one of the things, and you two are really good at it, but one of the things that we encounter a lot of are attorneys that don't really explain things to their clients. And so they get very confused, and it leads to additional disputes that maybe we didn't anticipate, like people signing term sheets and they didn't know what they just signed because their attorney didn't explain to them, that maybe it will be binding on you and you can't back out now because, we signed something. So that's really important. But I think that the one thing that we can glean for this conversation for everyone listening is this just is the tip of the iceberg. And it's really important to choose the right professionals to help you go through this process. And the right professional can help you in all aspects, including, as we've talked earlier, referring you to other people that can help you. So I really appreciate you both for giving me your time today and giving our listeners your expertise. Jamie, if anyone is interested in contacting your incredible firm, how would they do that?
I'm actually going to pass this one over to my partner because she is great at this.
Every time.
Every time.
Sarah.
You can find us everywhere. So you can find us at www.jacobsberger.com. We're also on Facebook at Jacobs Berger LLC, same handle on Instagram. I think we have a Twitter or X or whatever it is, or Threads, but we don't use it at this particular time, but we're there and you can find us. We have a YouTube channel where our videos are all housed either on our website, which also talk about how we practice, and they do have mediation on there, John. So you can find us pretty much anywhere. Just Google our names and there we pop up.
You can call our office.
I was going to
Oh,
say,
yeah.
like,
Our
if
office.
someone wanted to contact you, do you prefer it through like a website form, email, phone? Like, what's your preferred form of contact?
There is
All
a
forms of
website
contact.
form, but you can certainly call our office. It's 973-710-4366.
All right. And do you guys represent clients throughout New Jersey or in just one area of New Jersey?
We are throughout New Jersey. We are based in Morris County, but we practice throughout the state.
Awesome. Well, anyone looking for a good divorce and family law attorney or a good mediator, I think you found two excellent choices right here. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, John, for having us.
Nice to chat. Thank you.